What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Just wanted to remind you guys to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you end up enjoying this video, and if you're enjoying the daily uploads. If we could get to 1,000 likes on all these regular videos, I think that's a pretty good spot to aim for. When you do these things, it really helps the channel to grow and ensure that I can keep making these videos daily for a long time to come. If you guys have any thoughts about the stories in these videos, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as one of my favorite parts about making these videos is hearing your guys' thoughts about the stories therein. Without further ado, I will let you guys enjoy the next hour or so of true scary stories, and I will see you guys again at the end of the video. This happened like 12 years ago. I was 14 and my sister was 12. It was during summer vacation. We were hanging out, just the two of us outside, midday. We lived in a smallish town, where during the weekdays it was pretty empty because adults were all at work. Anyway, we'd just been messing around, picking flowers and doing some other random crap, when we decided to cut through a massive field of undeveloped land on the edge of our suburb. It was technically a shortcut to get home, but it wasn't the best idea. It was really bumpy, potted land that other kids and teens had left all sorts of shit laying in. Well, our bad decision came back around and bit us. We hadn't even made it very far into the field when my sister got two bad things at once. Some sort of twisted metal, perhaps an old piece of a tool, had pierced right through her foam flip-flop and into her foot. Right after this happened, she shrieked, jerked, and twisted that ankle on uneven ground. She started crying and howling. Of course, I was worried. The metal hadn't gone too deep, thankfully, and I was able to stop the bleeding with the hem of my shirt, but she couldn't walk anymore, obviously. Our parents weren't available, didn't know where we were, and this was before I had a cell phone. Well, crap. My sister was still on the ground crying. I was trying to calm her down when something made me feel the need to look up. It was the feeling of us being watched. Out in the field across the road, standing on the corner in the distance, was a random guy watching us. He was too far away for me to see him clearly. All I could tell for sure was that he was blonde and adult, and dressed way too warmly for July. He was all alone, stood stock still, just staring at us. I've always been a skittish horse, so I looked back at my sister and said to get on my back. I was carrying her home and we were leaving right now. I had to carefully pick my way through this stupid field in my own crappy flip-flops, with my crying sister on my back. Luckily, she was tiny. I wasn't exactly a linebacker myself. It had rained a couple of days ago, and the field had puddles of slimy water in the low spots. We were both wet and soaking from her falling when she got hurt. I swiveled back to check if the man was still watching us, and he was. Not only was he still watching us, he'd crossed the road and was entering the field. He was now standing stock still again, just watching. Ice in the veins doesn't even describe it. One of the scariest moments of my life up to that point. My sister looked when I looked, saw my face, and started crying even harder. I shook her a bit on my back and whispered something like, "Stop it, I need to concentrate on getting us home. Watch him and tell me if he starts following again." So that's what we did. I started walking as fast as I could without getting hurt. My sister watched him while I carried her. After a minute, she started whispering to me that he was moving again. "How fast?" "Just walking." "Is he watching us?" "Yes." I told her to tell me if anything changed, and kept going. I stomped through puddles I couldn't see into when I had to, hoping there was nothing sharp in them. I lost a flip-flop in the mud, but I just kept going. We were about 3/4 of the way through the massive field when my sister whispered what I least wanted to hear. He was chasing us. I turned us right around so we were facing him head on and yelled as loud as I could, "Hey, we see you! Fuck off and leave us alone or I'll call the cops!" There was no response. He stopped when I stopped, but gave no sign of acknowledging he'd heard me. I turned around again and kept going. My sister was shaking like a leaf, just saying my name over and over again. It was awful, but there was nothing I could do but to keep going. He started following again, this time at a slower pace. I finally made it to our suburb and out of the muddy field, on to solid concrete. I told my sister to hold on as tight as she could, and I booked it. I was running with her on my back as fast as I could manage. We couldn't see the man anymore. We didn't know what he was doing or where he was. I was going to make it to our house or die trying. Every muscle hurt from carrying her so far. My bare foot was all busted up from the road, but I didn't stop. I kept moving with my sister looking behind us. It felt like my heart was going to burst. The fear and suspense was awful. After what felt like forever, I made it to our house, ran across the yard, up the drive, put down my sister who'd started crying again. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely use my key. We made it in safely and called my mom. She had us lock every door and window and came rushing home, but nothing happened after. The man never found us, and we never saw him again after that. And that's the end. I have no idea who he was or why he was following us like that, but it gives me chills to this day. The way he'd stop when I stopped, the way he ignored my yelling, I don't know what he wanted or what he was doing, and I don't ever want to know. This was just last winter in early February. I was driving to my next DoorDash order. I was a bit tired as I'd been driving for the last 4 hours, and it was almost 12 a.m. After this one, I was definitely calling it a night and heading home. I was worried about getting sleepy on the road, especially with all the ice and snow around. I was driving down a fairly empty road. It was a side road that connected two of the main towns in our city. There was a 5-meter stretch, though, that had no buildings or houses anywhere. As I was driving down this section, I don't really know what happened. I just got hit with a sudden wave of tiredness that made me lose focus on the road for just a few seconds. That was all it took, though. I guess I hit a patch of ice and slid toward the side. Although I fully woke back up at this point, it was too far gone. I tried to steer back onto the road, but my car slid straight off and into the small ditch between the road and the woods. Thankfully, it wasn't a bad crash at all, since the snow really lightened the impact. It still made me shaky, though. I knew right away it was going to be impossible to get out of this. My car was stuck on the incline of the ditch in thick snow. I didn't even bother getting out to try and see how bad it was. I did test my luck trying to maneuver the car to get some traction, but if anything, that just made it worse. In the middle of trying to figure everything out, I noticed a car's headlights down the road. At first, I thought it was just a car passing by, but after a few seconds, it was clear they weren't moving. Someone must have just been parked down the road with their headlights on. I found that to be a little bit unnerving. What were the chances of this, being on this long, empty road? They weren't close enough to have stopped to try and help me, but they weren't far enough either to not see my headlights. I pulled out my phone and called my dad, knowing he'd still be awake and hoping he'd be able to help me. I'd never been in a situation like this, so I didn't really know what to do. He said he would call roadside assistance, then drive down to wait with me. I thanked him and felt relief, knowing he would be down here in just a few minutes. I looked back out on the road, looking for the headlights from the car I'd just seen, but suddenly they were gone. It was too dark to see anything that far without lights, so I didn't know if they'd driven away or if they were still there just waiting and had turned the lights off. It really started to creep me out the more I thought about it. I kept my eyes down the road, not looking away for more than a few seconds. I began getting very paranoid. There was something about the silence as well that made it more uneasy. only hearing the wind outside my car and nothing else. After 3 minutes of waiting, I saw a figure walking toward my car out of the darkness. He was down the road, coming from the direction where the headlights had been. I watched as he slowly made his way through the snow, getting to just 15 feet away from the front of my car. He then stopped and stood there, facing me but not moving. I couldn't see much of him, as he had a hoodie covering his face, but the way he stood there in my headlights started to terrify me. After a moment, I honked my horn softly a few times, just to let them know I was in the car and I could see them. They didn't move or acknowledge me. Just as I was pulling out my phone to call my dad again, the man turned around and walked away, disappearing down the road. I still called my father to let him know about this really strange person that was out here. He said he was just a minute away. I stayed on the phone with him this time, and only 30 seconds later, I saw headlights turn on down the road and begin moving toward my car. Once they were right across from me, they parked and turned off their lights once more. I couldn't see over the ditch, but I heard a door open. I yelled through my phone what was going on. Just then, my dad's car pulled right in front of my view and screeched to a stop. I heard him yelling at someone. They got back in their car and sped away. They did not come back. My dad said the guy had been holding something in his hands. It looked like a crowbar or something he was going to use to break into my car. Everything went okay after that though, and the car ended up not even having much damage to it. I'm not sure what was about to happen that night, but I'm lucky my dad pulled up exactly when he did. It was a snowy night when I pulled into the parking lot of my gas station. I worked the overnight 11 to 7 shift and had been at the job for several months before this. I didn't really like this job, but finding somewhere else to work was really difficult, and due to how things were in some other aspects of my life, night shifts were the best for my personal schedule. Still though, I went in tired every night and struggled to get through every shift. I parked in front of the building beside the only other car in the parking lot, which happened to be my coworker's. I went inside and relieved him of his own shift, and he left a couple of minutes later. Then it would be just me for the rest of the night. My manager had a paper on the desk with some of the things that needed to get done, but from reading it over, it wasn't actually all that much. My guess was that it wouldn't take any more than an hour total to complete all the tasks listed there. I tried to put it off as long as possible to save me from falling asleep. I wanted to start it up once I started getting really tired, so I wouldn't just conk out. As I sat there behind the desk, somewhere around 12 a.m. or so, a car pulled into the station. I glanced out of the window, seeing an old SUV parked by one of the pumps out there. Of course, with it snowing outside, most people were not driving around, but getting a customer every once in a while was perfectly normal. I went back to my phone and scrolled through some videos, not really paying much attention. Probably 10 minutes passed by until I looked back outside and saw the SUV was still out there by the pump. The headlights were off and the doors were closed. It looked like they should be out pumping gas, but it had been way too long for that. I stood up and got closer to the window, looking down both sides of the building. Nobody seemed to be anywhere outside. If they had just been in their car for the past 10 minutes with it shut off, they'd have to be freezing by now. It was snowy, windy, and cold. Honestly, I started to get a little bit nervous. I paid more attention for the next few minutes, waiting to see any movement for the windows or for someone to get back inside their car, but there was nothing. It was like the vehicle had just been abandoned right next to the pump. After some thought, I put on my jacket and went outside. Immediately, I knew I was right to worry. It was way too cold for anyone to be in there with the car off, or for anyone to even be outside for more than a few minutes. I rushed over to the car and looked around. I put my face close to the window and tried to look inside as well. "Hello? Is anyone in there? I'm just checking to see if you're okay." I called out, but from what I could see, there wasn't anyone inside. It wasn't exactly easy to see the interior though, so someone could have been in there. I was pretty sure there wasn't though. Now I was more confused than ever. I backed up and looked all around at the empty gas station parking lot. I started to walk back, now with my eyes not focused on the car. I was looking at the ground. I noticed footprints in the snow, going toward the building. Not really to the front of the building though, kind of off to the side somewhere. I looked back at the beginning of this trail. I saw it seemed to come from the car itself. At this point, I was freezing though, and didn't want to investigate any further. I went inside and turned on the small heater next to the counter, putting my hands up in front of it to warm them. I was only inside for 30 seconds to a minute before a loud thump resonated through the building. It sounded like it had come from somewhere behind me. I spun around, but I didn't see anything. I walked around the corner and to the back. On the floor, there were puddles of dirty water, like snow had been melting off someone's boots. I felt a chill run through me. I stepped closer to the back room and turned the corner to where the supply room was. Standing in the dark, hiding behind one of the shelves, I could see the outline of a figure. They were tall, with broad shoulders, and had a large scruffy beard. They were looking right at me. My heart stopped for a moment, but after the initial shock, my reaction was to walk back to the counter. I don't know why. Maybe I was just too shocked to react appropriately. After staring at the doorway to the supply room for who knows how long, with no signs of any movement, I quietly picked up the store phone and called the police. I whispered for help and endured the most unnerving 10 minutes of my life as I waited. During this time, I didn't hear or see anything from the supply room, which honestly added to my fear. For some reason, the man never emerged to confront me. When 2 cops finally pulled in, they came inside, and I quietly told them where the man was. They searched the room while I stayed by the front, but I was shocked when they came out with nobody else in tow. The man was gone. The watery shoe prints surrounded the back door, and outside there were fresh tracks in the snow, going straight away from the gas station into the completely empty, dark field that led on for miles. Obviously, nobody could search that at night, but even when they did in the following days, they didn't find anything. I mean, the field was huge. He could have gone anywhere really, but it was so cold and windy that night, I was sure they would find a body or something. The SUV was taken in for hopefully more information. I don't know how or why, but for some reason they couldn't find any history of ownership. That left us with just what we know from that night. And we're still left with only that. Who the man was, what he was doing, it all remains unsolved. Where he is now is just as much of a question, really. I worked at a restaurant with my older brother during our high school years. It was a really small restaurant in an outlet shopping center. We were both waiters there, but since the place was small, we often helped out all around, doing dishes, deliveries, whatever they needed really. After just a year of working there, my brother graduated high school and chose to go to college. He quit working there, but I stayed for a while. This happened a few months before I eventually left the job. It was Friday, so I was working a later shift than I usually did on other weekdays. The restaurant was open until 12 every night, but because of school, I usually never stayed late, no later than 8 or 9. Anyway, I was scheduled to close this night, alongside the manager. Everything was going pretty normal, slowing down by 8 and getting a few people picking up orders for the rest of the evening. At 10:30, my manager picked up a phone call for a delivery though. By 11 p.m., I was driving out of the parking lot and out onto the road. The address I was given on the receipt was just 8 minutes away from the store. As I drove a couple minutes down the road, I got a call from my manager. I answered right away thinking they must have canceled, but apparently the guy had called back saying he'd given the wrong address on accident. I pulled over and wrote down the new address. I typed in the new street into GPS, but right away I knew something was off here. It wasn't close at all. It was 25 minutes away, and the opposite direction of where I'd been going. If they had given this address to begin with, the order would have never been accepted this late. I thought about just going back to the restaurant and telling my manager, knowing he would understand. But I was already out there, and we had already taken the order, so I just started driving. The roads were pretty empty around town at this time of night. The further out I drove, the more desolate they became. I didn't even see any cars for the last 5 minutes of the drive. This was taking me out to the far edge of town, where most of the buildings and houses turned into grassy fields and lines of trees. When I approached the road the address was on, all I could see were a row of houses with all the lights off. As I drove down and past more of the houses, a few of them did have their porch lights on, but it still felt like a very empty area. It's worth mentioning these were not the nicest houses either, by any means. They were all single-story box-style homes. I pulled up to the one I was set to deliver to and parked on the side. Getting out with the food, I felt a strange, eerie sense as I walked up to the door. It was quiet outside. There were no streetlights and barely any house lights. It was extremely dark in this area. I knocked on the door and waited while a whole minute passed by. There was no sign of anyone being home. I was starting to get more and more uneasy. I just set the bag down and turned to walk back to my car. They hadn't paid yet, but the food was probably cold already, and it was of no use to me anyway. When I looked over at my car, though, a man was standing right behind it. He was leaned over like he was looking into the window. I stopped in place. I don't know if the man heard me approaching or what, but he immediately looked up at me. I could barely make out his face, but he was an older man. "Do you need something?" The man didn't move. I asked again, but nothing changed. That eerie sense was getting stronger. I looked around, but I didn't see anything other than trees in the dark. The man took a few steps back, moving away from my car and standing maybe 5 feet from the door. After a moment, I started walking over slowly, hoping to just get in and leave. As I got right up to the door, the man continued to stare at me from just a few feet away. I cautiously opened the door and rushed inside, but before I could even turn it on, the guy started yelling. I looked over at him, seeing him now facing the woods and just screaming gibberish. I turned my head slightly to look where he was looking. In the woods, I could see 2 or maybe even 3 figures rushing toward my car. My immediate thought was that this was a setup, and I needed to leave instantly before something happened. I turned my car on and shot out of there, just as the man next to me tried to move behind my car in an attempt to stop me. I was able to get out. Seeing and hearing the group of men yelling at me, I sped away. The cops were called, and though not much was able to be found, there were a few things. The address I was supposed to deliver to was apparently a vacant property. It wasn't technically abandoned, but the owners didn't even live in the state anymore. It wasn't for sale either. It was just left as is, rotting away for the past decade. The caller that placed the order was unknown, but the initial address he gave seemed to have no significance. Who the group was, what they planned to do, so many other things are left with no resolution. I'll probably be wondering about it for the rest of my life. After all, Had anything played out a little bit differently, I may not even be here right now. I remember when I was a child, I loved nothing more than to go out in the crisp white snow and play, to make footprints in the pure snow where no one else had before. It was bliss. This happened to my brother and I when we were kids. I remember on that day it had been snowing non-stop since the morning. My brother and I were itching to get outside and play in the snow. My mom said we couldn't go out there until the snow had stopped, though. We were pretty sick of playing indoors at this point. 5 p.m. rolled around, and it began to get slightly dark outside. The snow had finally stopped, though. Even though it was winter and it was past 5 p.m., it wasn't too dark out to see, so we pleaded with our mom to let us go out for just a little bit. She finally agreed, as long as it wasn't for more than an hour. We raced out to play in the snow. Even though it was very dim and gloomy out, thanks to the snow, it didn't seem all that dark. We lived out in the countryside back then. Pretty much right in front of our house, there was nothing but rice fields, which had now become pure white fields of snow. We were loving it, crunching the fresh snow underfoot. There were no other footprints in sight. This was our snow. Soon my brother and I had made this patch of snow all bumpy and misshapen. It wasn't fresh and untouched any longer, so we went in search of pure white snow to play in. We walked further from our house. It was hard to see where the road began and the fields ended, but we found a field just ahead of a single street light. The light made it look like the snow was shimmering. That was the perfect snow we were talking about. What would we do with this patch of snow? We decided to use our footprints to make a giant smiling face. We planned out how we would make the face and got to work right away. We were totally immersed in our footsteps. We didn't have much time to create our masterpiece. Maybe someone would see it from the sky later. I think it took no longer than 15 minutes to finish our feet artwork. We went back to where we thought the road was, to see our art beneath the streetlight. I was really happy with it. I looked over to my brother when I noticed he was staring somewhere beyond the field. He looked really concerned. He began to breathe heavily. I looked in the direction he was staring at, and I started breathing heavily myself. We shot each other glances to see if we were seeing the same thing. Just beyond our art in the snow was a figure in the snow. A woman in a wedding dress, a white kimono bridal gown. We couldn't believe our eyes. We were sure we were the only ones in the field just now. I saw traces of my footprints and my brother's, but not that woman's. She made no imprint in the snow at all. The woman began to move towards us. My brother and I broke into a run, and we aimed for the likes of our family home. We ran as fast as we could, screaming and shouting for our mother. She threw the door open and came out with a concerned look on her face. We blurted out what we'd just seen. She listened to our story, but just laughed it off. She didn't even look outside. A few years later, when I was in high school, I asked my little brother about that one snowy night. I said, "She was creepy, that bride in the snow, huh?" I didn't like that I couldn't see her face because of the way she was bent over. He said that he remembered that night well. "Oh, that bride in the snow? We didn't see her head because she didn't have one." He looked pale. It made me shiver. Whatever happened to that girl out there, I'm convinced that that day we saw a ghost in the snow. Recently, there was an Amber Alert, and my daughter was asking me what all the beeping sounds were all about. For those of you who don't know, an Amber Alert is an emergency alert that goes out whenever a child is reported missing. If you receive notifications, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The alert will often give information like the victim's appearance as well as the perpetrators, the location of the abduction, the make and model of vehicle to look out for. My phone started beeping one evening while helping my daughter clean her room, an Amber Alert. I gave her the small rundown and that was that. However, in doing so, it triggered a childhood memory I have, where I believe with all my heart that I was almost taken when I was a kid. To be clear, this isn't a memory that was like lying dormant in my subconscious or something. It's something I've pondered on and off about for years now. I'm a 41-year-old man, by the way. This occurrence happened when I was just a young boy. My guess is around 7 or 8. I can't be sure since it was so long ago. My parents took me to a neighboring city to do some shopping. We lived in a rural town with not much to offer, so from time to time we would head down to the city, about 45 minutes from where we were situated. It just kinda had more to offer, honestly. They would take me up there for school clothes shopping, out to eat because the restaurants were better, and to grab stuff because my mom was a crafter. She really loved to make crafts. It was her thing. There were various different craft stores and a fabric store, and she really liked going to that one. This specific trip, we went to a fabric store, Joann's Fabrics to be exact, I believe. It was a pretty large store. As a kid, I guess almost every place seems big, but no kidding, this was a gigantic place. My dad sat out in the car while I went in with my mom. He did that a lot. He wasn't so interested in these things as we were. Can't exactly blame him there. I can't exactly recall what my mom was looking for or trying to buy that day, but I remember we were in an area with a bunch of racks with various fabrics hanging around us. The area was toward the beginning or entrance of the store. As my mom was looking through these various racks, I began to wander around through them, just enough to kind of look around myself, not that far. I was pretty bored, honestly. I could see my mom through the racks just a bit away, so it wasn't like I'd lost her or anything. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, a random man approached me. I didn't even see what direction he'd come from. It was almost like I was there by myself 1 minute, and then the next I looked up and this guy appeared out of thin air. He had come in fast and out of nowhere. I looked over to where my mom was. She had moved a fair bit away, but I could still see her. There was a good distance between us at this point. Here I am standing in this maze of fabric with this older guy. He then whispers to me, "Hey there, little boy. How you doing there?" I remained silent because this took me off guard. "Where are your folks at? Are you alone in here?" I stayed quiet and tried to ignore him. "Hey, come here. I got something cool to show you." At this point, he started advancing toward me, slipping through the racks to where I was. I quickly started to go the other way, but he swiftly moved to cut me off at the middle. I was scared. I became instantly aware this man was dangerous, and he was trying to grab me. "Come here," he barked. I jerked to the left, and he did the same. He got this wild look in his eyes. Whichever direction I tried to flee, he moved to cut me off. There was a big rack between us, though, and I'm thankful for that. After some back and forth movements from me and the man, I finally locked in on my mom. "Mom, help me!" You would have thought I'd screamed bloody murder. It was so loud it got my mom's attention immediately. "What's wrong?" she asked. This obviously startled the man. He looked over my shoulder in the direction of where I was looking and confirmed that my mother really was there. His demeanor immediately changed, as if everything was just fun and games and he had just been messing around. "I was just playing with your boy here. No harm, ma'am." My mom came to where I was, and as we reconnected, the man tipped his hat at my mom and swiftly slipped his way out of the store. I explained to my mom everything that happened. I was so upset and shaken up. She told me I'd done the right thing by yelling and getting attention. It was terrifying for sure, and I'm grateful the man wasn't able to grab me and escape. Could I have been imagining things? Maybe this guy really was just messing around. I don't think so, though. I think very much he had nefarious intentions. Why would a random old guy be perusing the fabric store anyway? And if he was there for something like crafts, why leave immediately when confronted? He truly was up to no good. I had a year where I lived in complete and total hell. Many scary things happened that I can tell you about during that time period. It was the worst time of my life, and has left me messed up for the remainder of it. However, it was the beginning of that hell that was the most scary. I remember I was walking home from school by myself. I had this shortcut I like to take through the woods to get home much faster. I did this all the time basically, but this time something strange was going on. Even before I got to the woods, I felt like someone had been following me. There were these 3 big guys walking not too many steps behind me. Every corner I turned, they followed me, and when I turned off the sidewalk in order to cut through the woods, I totally expected them to follow me through there as well. I was surprised and very relieved when they didn't do that. My apprehension didn't go away once I got into the woods, though. I kept hearing what I thought was someone following me. There were sounds of twigs breaking and things being stepped on. I was nervous. I wished I had never taken that shortcut. I kept telling myself that my mind was just playing tricks on me, and there really was nothing out there. All of a sudden, though, I heard a voice to the side of me. "We're gonna get ya," in a real sing-song manner. He sang it several times. I decided I needed to make a run for it. However, as I started to run, one of the big guys I saw earlier stepped out in front of me. He blocked my path and prevented me from moving any further. I was stopped dead in my tracks. I was about to turn around and run back the way I came, but as I tried, I saw someone coming at me from the side. I looked the other way, and a 3rd person was coming at me. I still tried to run back the way I came. I didn't get very far. One of the guys tackled me to the ground. He held me down by my ankles, and I went face first into the dirt. As I struggled, they tied my arms behind my back, and then one of the people shoved a bag over my head. I was taken roughly and shoved into a car. I could hardly believe this. I was being kidnapped. I mean, who would want to take me? It didn't make any sense at all. I was convinced this was the end of my life. I thought about Adam Walsh. I wondered if I would be tortured like he was and possibly beheaded. All the worst thoughts went through my mind. After I was shoved out of the car, I was brought to a building where they took the bag off me. I was shocked to see I was in some sort of office. Things were explained to me, and it was nearly as horrifying as the kidnapping itself. It had all been set up by my parents, they told me. They had enrolled me into a school meant for kids with bad behavior, only it wasn't a school at all. It was a torture area. They fed us food not even fit for animals. I recall throwing up once, and them forcing me to eat it up off the ground. We had to sleep on the floor, and it was always cold. There were regular beatings and torture of all sorts. There was no education, just mental programming. Fortunately, I was able to play their game and get out quickly, but that's not much solace for the other kids who had to put up with all of that for much longer. Several of these schools exist, and thankfully Netflix has a docu-series about them now. Imagine that. A place so horrible that the kidnapping was the least scary part about it. Things like that should not exist. I was catfished by a creepy, much older guy. I was 17 and in the 11th grade. I didn't usually accept random requests on my Instagram, especially if we had no mutuals. I took my page off private for a while so anyone could follow me. This is when I got a notification that the guy had started following me. The page had a normal following, not small enough to question whether it was a fake account or not. He had multiple pictures of himself, his friends, his family, all with captions and everything. His comments were off for all his posts, but that wasn't much a red flag. I did that for my account too. Immediately after following me, he went through my profile and liked all of my pictures. He was a fit, good-looking guy, so I was quite flattered. Not long after, he DM'd me, replying to a story of mine. He asked me if I was from so-and-so city, and said that he was from there too. We immediately hit it off, and DM'd non-stop for a while. It didn't feel forced at all, and we never ran out of things to talk about. Eventually, we swapped phone numbers and started texting. He told me he was studying at a really good university, which was in a city 2 hours away from where we both lived. Our talks escalated to day-to-day phone calls, which could last for hours. I sincerely started developing feelings for him, and he made it clear he felt the same for me. We would talk about our deepest insecurities, our pasts, what we wanted our futures to look like. It had been about 2 months of talking, and I was undeniably eager to meet up in person. He would tell me he was coming to visit on the weekend, but would always come up with some excuse as to why he couldn't make it. He gave very convincing and detailed excuses, never vague, so I didn't question it. I hadn't told any friends about him until my best friend and I had a sleepover. I ended up telling her about him, showed her his profile, didn't leave out that we hadn't met yet either. Wanting to look out for me, she suggested I ask him to video chat to make sure he really was who he said before meeting up. She told me she didn't want to freak me out, but she was sure she had seen these pictures somewhere before. There's tools on Google that can be used to locate social media accounts and articles where pictures had been posted. While she was using one of those to search up his photos, I called him and asked him if he was at home and alone. I asked him if he could video chat. He couldn't make up an excuse so on the spot. He said he was home and alone, but couldn't video chat because of his weak internet connection. My heart immediately sank. The possibility of this guy not being who he said he was not so far-fetched anymore. I quickly downloaded WhatsApp because I remembered him telling me he spoke to his parents on it. Before doing that, though, my friend showed me the results she'd found, which devastated me to my core. The person in the pictures was actually a French model of some sort. We found the exact pictures the guy had used on his profile, an actual verified Instagram account. My devastation turned into anger, then into absolute disgust. I saw his actual profile picture on WhatsApp. He was evidently much older than he claimed to be, probably in his 30s, and a completely different race than what he portrayed. He'd lied about being a university student. He'd lied about basically everything. I wanted to crawl into a hole and die. I started to sob and confronted him on WhatsApp. He went on to explain how he came across my profile randomly and desperately wanted to have me. He said he knew I wouldn't be interested in who he actually was and wouldn't be attracted to him, so he used a fake account to try and get me. He said he came close to coming clean multiple times but was afraid of how I would react. He said even though his persona was fake, everything else was genuine. Turns out he was a 31-year-old mechanic, living with his parents. He even confessed to driving to my neighborhood, finding my high school, and secretly following me around as I went about my day. I blocked him, and he quickly started texting my number from other sources, begging me not to block those too, and to give him a chance to explain things face to face. Obviously, I blocked him on everything, feeling absolutely heartbroken and betrayed. I spent months of my life daydreaming and fantasizing about how it would be like when we finally met in person, and where it would go from there. I grew genuine feelings for him, and even considered applying for the same university he was supposedly going to. I got over it eventually, but I'd definitely grown to be very paranoid and distrusting when it comes to anyone online. I'm happily married now, but I wonder what would have happened if he and I had really met in person. What were the consequences I would have faced for being so naive and oblivious? I had a terrifying experience last year. I live alone in a smaller house, and I've been living there for about 3 years now. It has 2 bedrooms and just 1 bathroom, but that's enough space for me. I also have a somewhat small front yard and a fenced-in backyard as well. One Friday night, I got home from work a little bit early. I didn't really have anything going on that night, but I was going to hang out with some friends the following day. Because of this, I decided to do all my chores right now and not have to deal with them later. There was a lot of stuff I had to do throughout the week, but some of that I would just leave for the weekends, like doing laundry or vacuuming the carpet, etc. After getting home, I started doing all that stuff. I did the laundry, I vacuumed, I cleaned up the bathroom. I also organized a few things. It surprisingly didn't take me all that long. I'd finished basically everything. I was going to cook some food for myself. I remember I had this recipe I had saved on my phone, and I was really excited to try it. When I went to go try, though, I realized that I couldn't find my phone anywhere. Obviously, I didn't have it on me when I was cleaning. Usually I would just leave it on the coffee table in the living room, or sometimes on the couch playing music or something. When I looked in both of those places, I couldn't find it. I wasn't too worried until I searched the entire kitchen and it wasn't there either. I went into the bathroom, my bedroom. I knew it wouldn't be there probably, but I looked everywhere anyways. After not finding it anywhere, I wondered if I'd lost it somewhere at work or something. As I thought back and tried to retrace my steps, I remembered that I had my phone on me shortly after arriving back at my house. I had sent a message to one of my friends about tomorrow, so I knew that it had to be around in here somewhere. I took all the cushions off my couch, wasn't there either. I basically turned the entire place upside down, but I couldn't locate my phone anywhere. This puzzled me greatly. I didn't have a house phone or any other sort of phone, so I couldn't call it to see where it was. The last place I decided to look was the basement. I had an unfinished basement which I really never used. There were all kinds of pipes and beams and all sorts of things sticking out down there. I also stored several large boxes and other items. I did keep my vacuum down there next to the base of the stairs. I had only gone down there for a moment earlier to grab the vacuum and pull it back up, but maybe on some slim, crazy chance, it had fallen out of my pocket or something after I forgot it. I mean, I looked everywhere else. I didn't know where else it could be. I turned on the light and started to head down the stairs. The light didn't do a whole lot, though. All it did was light up one measly bulb near the base of the stairs. After walking down, I looked on the floor near the vacuum, but I didn't see anything. I was about to turn around and head back upstairs when I heard a strange noise. I thought I could make out some movement out of the corner of my eye as well. It was out of sight and in a dark area of the basement, so I couldn't quite be sure. I stopped and tried to look in the direction of what I thought I saw, and I observed a bit closer. That's when a man started to come into view. He was hiding behind a large box. He looked really creepy, and I honestly couldn't believe what I was seeing. He was a ways away. I was so shocked for a second or two that I didn't know how to react. The man stood up from behind his hiding place and actually started to move toward me. I turned and bolted up the stairs, like my life depended on it. For all I knew, it might have. I made it to the top and left my basement, then slammed the door shut behind me. I ran for my front door and didn't stop until I made it all the way outside. During this, I didn't think at all. It was really all just instinctual reaction. I just wanted to get out of my house. After leaving, I realized I hadn't grabbed my keys or anything. I obviously didn't have my phone either, so I couldn't call the police. Now I couldn't get into my car either. I didn't exactly want to go back inside and grab it, so instead I ran to a neighbor's house. I didn't go next door because I thought the guy might run outside after me, so instead I ran several doors down and knocked on the front door of that house. I didn't know who lived there, but I hoped they would be kind enough to answer. After about 30 seconds, they did. I asked them to call the police and told them what was happening. They agreed to call, and we waited on their front step together. We watched the direction of my house, but saw no signs of anybody trying to leave. I wasn't sure if the guy had already left, or if he was still inside somewhere skulking about. The police were really quick to respond, though, and got there within less than 2 minutes. I went back over with my neighbor and met an officer there. The police then entered my home. A while later, they came out with the same man I had seen in my basement. He had still been in the house. In fact, he'd gone back down to the basement to hide. When they pulled him out, they discovered he had my cell phone in his pocket. I was able to get my phone back, but obviously the whole thing really creeped me out a lot. I'm not sure when or how he managed to grab my phone. The only thing I can think of is that he must have already been inside my house when I got back from work. He must have come upstairs without me noticing, grabbed my phone, and went back down. How he got into my house, or when he got in, I have no idea. Maybe I was so tired I forgot to lock my front door, or maybe he entered through a window or something. There were no signs of a break-in from what I could tell. Either way, since that experience, I bought a lot of security cameras, and I always double-check to make sure everything is locked. I was 16 last year. Me and my friend Leon were hanging out a few days before Halloween, talking about what we wanted to do. We felt too old to go trick-or-treating, but we also still wanted to do something at least. Have some fun during the holiday, you know? We thought up a few ideas, most being quickly discarded, but then I thought of something different. I reminded Leon of the abandoned farm that both of us had already known about and suggested we explore before. It would be creepy, it would be thrilling. That's exactly what you want for Halloween. Also, compared to our other ideas, this one was just the best one by a long shot. Leon was excited about it too. We both agreed that other people would probably have the same idea to go on October 31st though, so instead we chose to go one night before. We didn't want to risk running into anyone crazy at an abandoned place like that. We just wanted to explore and maybe get a little bit spooked, then leave. It sounded harmless enough. On the 30th of October, Leon drove us out to the neighborhood it was by and parked on the road. We got out and walked through the neighborhood until we got to the street that turned into a gravel path. This was the driveway leading up to the farm. I'd only ever seen that place during the day. It was pretty much just a large field of grass with a typical wooden barn and a single-story home. From the edge of the path, neither structure was visible. Our flashlights only lit up a few feet ahead of us. As we started making our way down the gravel driveway, once we started to get a bit closer, we could make out the outline of the barn on the left side and the house further back at the end of the driveway. Honestly, we were more interested in the home itself, figuring the barn was probably completely empty and wouldn't be very exciting. We kept walking and eventually got to a clearing in the tall grass. It was a circle of dirt, really. As we approached the front, we passed by some large farming equipment. I don't know what they were exactly, some old tractor-looking things that had been left out for years. Even with the dim light of our flashlights, we could see they were completely engulfed in rust. When we got up to the porch, it looked like the door had been replaced by a single wooden board. We walked around the whole outside of the house, and every window and door was sealed and covered. Disappointed, we went back to the front and tried to think of something else. As we stood there, we saw the path going up to the barn wasn't an actual path at all. It was more of a line of flattened grass. With nothing else to do, we started heading for the barn. Something felt different as we approached it, though, compared to when we'd approached the house. It was a vaguely uneasy feeling that grew as we got closer and closer. When we reached it, the large door was already wide open. I walked in first, and Leon followed behind. We both shined our flashlights around as we entered. It only took a few seconds for an absolutely horrid smell to hit us, though. It was a barn, so that wasn't exactly surprising. But then we noticed something else. There were footprints all over the ground. Not the kind you'd expect from other kids exploring the place, though. They all went in a line back and forth from a single point on the other side of the barn. I looked and saw that in Leon's eyes he was just as freaked out as I was. Still, that was the goal of going here in the first place. We slowly walked in line with the footprints, which led to a wooden cellar hatch that blended in with the floor. The only noticeable thing, other than the clear footsteps going up to it, was a brand new shiny padlock holding the hatch shut. Before we could really think about it, though, a sudden thud shook the entire barn. We turned around and saw the door had been shut behind us. Leon sprinted over and panically shoved the door wide open. Both of us looked around, but we couldn't see anyone. Now terrified, we sprinted straight through the tall grass and back to the gravel driveway, then booked it to the neighborhood where the car was. We definitely got the scare we had been looking for, but perhaps too much so. Neither of us ever tried to figure out what happened that night. A couple months later, we saw the whole house and barn had been blockaded up. We tried to look up why that was, but there was no word publicly about what was going on there. It remains a mystery, but I think if we stayed to find out, we may have never left at all. One of the things that I really enjoy doing is traveling and exploring the outdoors. I've been to many national parks and hiking trails over the past few years. Actually, I didn't really travel all that much until about 3 years ago. I changed jobs and suddenly had a lot more personal time to travel with the new one. Anyway, this story takes place a couple of years back, when I was still pretty new to the whole traveling thing. I had gone to a national park that I was really excited about. It wasn't all that popular, but it had some good hiking trails. Of course, I went there all by myself and started hiking in the morning. There were so many trails to explore in that park. After I did one of them, I went down to the local town. After hanging out there for a while and getting to know some of the locals, I got the itch to do some more hiking. I went back later in the afternoon, when the park was not so busy. It was large and spread out, so really it depended what trails and sections you went to. I went to a different spot this time. It was all kinds of terrain, hills, mountains, wooded areas. What I didn't know is that the trail I'd chosen was much longer and more complex than any of the other ones. I'm sure if I would have looked at the sign at the beginning, I would have realized it was a much more challenging affair, but I don't recall observing anything like that. I pretty much just went on the trail and started. There wasn't really anybody else on it. I also noticed that it was very quiet. I was really enjoying it starting out. Pretty soon, though, I was going farther and farther, and I realized it was starting to get pretty late. The sun would be setting in just about 30 minutes. I went in a little bit further, then decided to head back. There were multiple areas where the trail went in different directions, sometimes even splitting 3 or 4 ways. All the while, I had only seen a couple of people the entire time, and they were all near the beginning. I tried to go back, but soon I became very confused what direction I was even going in. I blamed this on the terrain. There were a lot of areas where you had to climb up or down rocks, kind of like stairs. I was trying to find my way back for about 30 minutes before it started to get really dark out. At that point, I realized I wasn't making any progress. I took out my phone, but it had no signal. I'd never really had a good signal the entire time I was in the park. I turned off my phone, then turned it on again. That didn't do anything. As I was walking back in what I thought might be the right direction, I soon began to hear something. It sounded like someone else was walking on the trail behind me. I turned around and saw a man right there. I stopped and waited for him to catch up. He was wearing black pants and a black shirt and had longer dark brown hair. He was also wearing a hat and sunglasses. I wasn't exactly sure where he'd come from, but I was glad to have someone there with me. I said hello to the man, and he said hello back to me. I told him I was lost and not sure of the way out. He said right away that he knew it. The man told me that he had hiked this trail many times before, and he knew the entire thing like the back of his hand. I described to him where I'd parked my vehicle, and he told me that he could lead me there. The man seemed perfectly friendly and normal. I felt much better after hearing that. The man told me to follow him, and we both started hiking back. After that point in time, he really didn't say anything to me. He started to go really fast, too. I didn't say much back to him either. I assumed he was going so fast because it was getting darker and darker out. We hiked for a good 20 minutes, and that's when I first began to question him. Even though I had gotten lost myself and was clearly not the best with directions, something about this just told me we were going the wrong way. One of the turns that he made I was for sure was completely wrong, but I didn't say anything. Who was I to criticize someone with more experience? I'd gotten myself lost in the first place. Thing is, 10 more minutes went by and we were only going deeper and deeper in. We passed by many places I was 100% sure I had not seen before. I was hoping to myself it was some kind of shortcut. Possibly any second we would turn out right near the entrance to the path, but that was not happening. I finally asked him how much further it would be. He claimed that it was not that much farther. Said for me to keep following him. After 5 more minutes, there was still no signs of anything. I wasn't sure if he was clueless or leading me the wrong way on purpose. We kept going, and I saw we were headed for a really dense patch of woods. Then he said it. "It's right over there, see?" I knew it was not there. There was no parking lot in sight, and the terrain was nothing like where I'd entered. I said that it didn't look like where I'd gone in, and asked him if there were multiple connecting parking lots or something. Maybe he'd gotten it confused for another one. The man said no, that was it. He was still walking in front of me at this point. He started to climb down a really steep area of rocks. I knew I needed to get away from him as soon as I could. As he started to make his way down, I acted like I was about to go too, then turned and ran in the opposite direction. As soon as I started sprinting down the trail away from him, I heard him immediately do a U-turn and begin climbing back up the rocks. The terrain would give me a pretty decent head start on him. I had no plan at all. I was just winging it. I felt danger, like the guy was leading me into the middle of the woods for a nefarious purpose. After running 50 feet, I stumbled upon some really tall grass and bushes. I crouched down and kept going through them. Eventually, I came out to a connecting trail, and I no longer heard the man behind me anymore. I slowed down and felt a bit better, but it was still dark out and I was still lost. I walked at a quick pace, trying to go more in the direction I thought was correct. I walked for about 20 minutes when I heard someone walking up ahead again. I saw the person, but thankfully I realized this time it was a park ranger. I approached him and asked if he knew how to get out. Of course he did. I followed the ranger, who was actually a very nice guy. I told him about the strange man I'd encountered before. He seemed very concerned about it. He said that guy had not been leading me near any exit at all. He had been leading me into the deepest parts. He radioed in and reported the incident. After we made it back to the parking lot, he said he would investigate it for me. After that, I left for the rest of the trip, and ever since then, I've been much more careful. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.